Again, there's no doubt that the United States grossly mistreated Black people in our history, but the racism that became pervasive in our country became pervasive as an ideology versus just an inherited practice of slavery after the founding of our country, especially in the South. And that in and of itself is a much overlooked part of history, how ideology changed between the founding and between when slavery was at its height in the South. Before that kind of anti-Black ideology took hold of the South to the extent that it did, Congress abolished the slave trade. In fact, the first day that Congress was allowed, the very first day that they could prohibit the importation of slaves, they did so. Congress passed and President Thomas Jefferson signed that prohibition into law. Congress then restricted slavery even further. They passed the Northwest Ordinance in 1787 that outlawed slavery in the Northwest Territories. 7 years after that, Congress prohibited the building of ships for the explicit purpose of the slave trade. In addition, individual states, and this builds on what I said before, that the Revolution's founding principles were inherently, fundamentally anti-slavery. So building on this idea that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with unalienable rights, 8 individual states after the Revolution, they did this through either legislature or through courts, began to abolish slavery. Vermont, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey. Even in Virginia, Thomas Jefferson himself introduced a bill in the legislature in 1778 that banned the importation of slavery. He said that he hoped that this would lead to the institution's, quote, final eradication. Now, eventually, thanks to the principles in the Constitution and in the Declaration, less than 100 years after the United States declared independence from Britain, slavery was abolished completely. So what does this tell us? If we summarize this, this is what we find. America's founding fathers thought that slavery was abhorrent and it should be abolished. They contradicted this with their own behavior, yet they set up a government that they purposely, intentionally knew would lead to the abolition of slavery. They, in fact, thought the Constitution would end slavery quicker than it did. So this was the question they grappled with. Should they create a system of government that continued to tolerate slavery temporarily, but would eventually lead to the abolition of slavery? Or should they refuse to create a system of government that allowed slavery even temporarily because it was so abhorrent and not create the Union at all? That's a very heavy question. To me, it's somewhat the equivalent of banning late-term abortion. Do we ban late-term abortions while implicitly then allowing first and second trimester abortion to continue, even though it's all a grave moral evil? Or do we ban what we can while laying the framework and the groundwork to work towards banning it all? History is very, very important in answering the questions posed by the left, in countering their radical leftist ideology. Was the United States conceived in racism? No, it was not. Was racism and slavery antithetical to the founding principles? Yes, inarguably. Did sinful men misapply those founding principles to justify racism and slavery and discrimination against Black people in our country? Yes. But did America course correct due to the anti-slavery nature of those founding principles? Yes. Are we the most free and equal and just nation in world history thanks to the system of government founded by those flawed and sometimes racist men? Yes, we are. So is America systemically racist? No. We are quite the opposite.